Thanks for joining me here on Maple Leafs Man Advantage. And I'm Hawkeye. And this is episode 22 in my look into why the Leafs haven't won a Stanley Cup since 1967. And today I'm going to talk about a massive trade that the Leafs made back in 1968. Um, and it was a huge one, probably definitely one of the biggest trades the Maple Leafs have ever made in their history. And I'm going to talk about that one today, just have a video specifically for this trade and look into it a little further and give my opinion about the trade. So it happened on March the 3rd, 1968, and it was certainly Plunk Imlach, the GM of the Toronto Maple Leafs, along with Sid Abel, the GM and coach of the Detroit Red Wings, worked out this deal. And I'll just say, maybe it's because I'm a Leaf fan, but it was probably a deal that may have rocked the hockey world and Leaf fans that I talked to of a certain vintage, like certainly my father. There's a guy I work with, Paul. Um, they talk about these guys, or they like to talk about these guys. These are the guys that played in Toronto when they were growing up. But what the trade was is the Leafs acquired center Norm Ullman, right winger Floyd Smith, left winger Paul Henderson, and defenseman Doug Barry. And then going to Detroit, they acquired left winger Frank the Big M Mahovlich, center Pete Stemkowski, another center in Gary Unger, and the rights to defenseman Carl Brewer, who has not played since he walked out on the Leafs training camp back in, I think it was 1964 or 65. I apologize, I don't remember. So yeah, there's some big names involved with this trade, and I'm going to definitely take a look at each of the players here going on with this trade. So I'll start with who came to Toronto. And first we got Norm Ullman, and it's a good guy to start with. He's a Hall of Famer, and he had played parts of the past 13 seasons for Detroit. He was also known as Noisy. um, I'd like to know why. I didn't really look into why he was known that. He seemed like a very quiet guy. Maybe that's it. He didn't make a lot of noise. He was a nine-time All-Star, so 1955, 1960 through 65, 1967, and 1968. He led the NHL in goals in 1964-65 when he had 42. He was the star that the Leafs picked up in this trade. He was the big man in this trade. He had already played 875 games with 324 goals, 434 assists, and he had a total of 758 points. Now, he was 32 years of age, so he was getting up there, but I I would say he still had some time left in the tank for sure. With the Leafs, he would actually go on to play another 535 games with 166 goals, 305 assists for 471 points. He scored 30 goals a couple times after the trade in Toronto, and in the following season, he scored 35. He would go on to play two more All-Star games, so 1969 and 74. Then he jumped over to the WHA at the age of 40 years old and played two seasons with, I believe, the Edmonton Oilers, both seasons. He played 144 games with 47 goals, 83 assists, 430 points. He banged in 31 in the 1975-76 season for the Oilers as well. Now, what I would say about Norm Ullman, I've seen him play. This is amazing because I've never seen him play before I started doing my blog, and I heard about him for years. And I watched him, and personally, I would say he could be one of the most underrated Leafs of all time, especially at this time because he was a centerman, right? But he would be playing behind Dave Keon. He was the number one center, so he was a number two center in Toronto, and he would have been in Detroit too, playing under like Alex Delvecchio. So he was really underrated, and I would definitely put him on the list of guys that um, like the upper echelon of Leafs. Norm Ullman belongs there. He was that good of a player. He was spectacular, really. So there you have it. Now, next coming to Toronto is Floyd Smith. He was also known as Smitty. He also was 32 years of age, so a couple of older fellows here. He had played 403 games. He scored 98 goals with 132 assists for 230 points. This season, actually, he had his career high in goals. He had 24 with both Detroit and Toronto. He would go on to play the parts of the next three seasons for the Leafs before being traded along with Punch's son, Brent Imlach, to the Buffalo Sabres, where he spent two more seasons. Floyd would play an additional 214 games with 31 goals, 46 assists for 77 points. He then became part of the coaching staff with the Sabres. Now, Punch Imlach was the GM at the Sabres with the Sabres at the time. So there was already a relationship between the two there going on. And he became the head coach there for a few seasons, 1974 through 77. And he came back to Toronto and was an assistant coach in Toronto for a season 1980 81 when guess who? Punch Imlach was back in town in Toronto as well. Now, next coming over to Toronto was Paul Henderson. Absolutely the first thing that comes to mind. I'll get into that, I'm sure, when I talk about him here. Just take a look, but it is the 1972 Summit Series, Canada against the Russians. I'll get into that when I talk about him here. He was also known as Bullet, likely referring to his shot, and he did have a good shot. It was quick, um, nice quick shot. He had played the parts of the previous six seasons with the Red Wings. He had played 269 games with 67 goals, 79 assists for 146 points. He had scored 20 goals on two separate occasions already. He had his career high at the time, 22 for the 1965-66 Wings. He would go on to play the parts of the next seven seasons in Toronto. He scored 30 goals twice for the Leafs and had a career high 38 in 1971-72. He then jumped over to the WHA and he played there for five seasons. He played for the Toronto Toros from 1974 through 76, along with former Leaf and somebody also in this trade, Frank Mahovlich. He then played three seasons for the Birmingham Bulls. Mahovlich then played with him there as well. After the WHA folded, he did come back to the NHL and played one season for the Atlanta Flames. In total in the NHL, he would go on to play another 438 games with 169 goals, 162 assists for 331 points. For the Leafs, he would play in two All-Star games, so 1972 and 73. In the WHA, he would play 360 games with 140 goals, 143 assists for 283 points. He scored 30 goals twice in the WHA and grabbed 37 for the Toros in 1977-78. At the time of the trade, he was I would say getting into his prime. He was only 25, perfect age to grab a guy in a trade. As I said, he was a gigantic part of that 1972 Canadian team that played the Russians at the Summit Series in 1972. It still gets me. He scored three game winners in that series, including his infamous Game 8 winner to give Canada the series win. It was excellent job there by Henderson. He was only second to Phil Esposito on the Canadian team in points. He scored seven goals and had 10 points in eight games against the Russians. He likely played his best hockey in his career during that series. And if I'm not mistaken, on his line was also another Leaf and Ronnie Ellis. He played on the other wing. And I think it was Bobby Clark in the center. of the Philadelphia Flyers. So then, finally, the last guy coming to Toronto in this trade was Doug Barry. He had yet to play in the NHL. He was only 21 years old at this time, so a good young player. He would go on to play I'm sorry, 158 NHL games, scoring 10 goals with 42 assists for 52 points. And he wasn't afraid of the penalty box as he grabbed 268 penalty minutes. He never did play a game for the Leafs, though, but he did play for the Pittsburgh Penguins, the Buffalo Sabres, and the LA Kings. Another guy, this happened to a lot of players. He went over to the WHA for 5 seasons for the Alberta Oilers, who then became the Edmonton Oilers from 1972 through 77. He played 350 games there with 37 goals, 122 assists for 159 points, and also grabbed 620 PIMs. He had 214 PIMs in 1973-74. So he was not afraid of the penalty box and likely was a bit of a bruiser out there. So that's who's coming to Toronto. We got certainly some good talent and a Hall of Famer coming to Toronto. So let's look and see who's going to Detroit here. So we'll start at the top of the list here. For the Wings, they acquired Frank Mahovlich, who, like Norm Ullman, he is also in the Hall of Fame, who played the previous 12 seasons with the Leafs. He won the Calder Trophy for top rookie in 1970, 57, 58, sorry, and was a 9-time All-Star, so 1959 through 65, 67, and 68. He won 4 Stanley Cups in Toronto, 1962 through 64 and 1967. He was 30 years of age at the time, so he's now in his 30s. But he had played 720 games in Toronto with 296 goals, 301 assists for 597 points, and he also had 780 penalty minutes. He had 48 goals back in 1960-61. He was that close to getting 50 goals. Very close. After the trade, Frank would play 6 more All-Star games. So 1969 through 74, he would play another 461 games with 237 goals, 269 assists for 506 points. He scored 40 goals twice or 2 more times in his career and had a career 49 the following season for the Wings. He would continue to score some goals. He would win 2 more Stanley Cups with the Montreal Canadiens, and then he played 4 seasons in the WHA for the Toronto Toros, 1974-75, and the Birmingham Bulls, 76-77. Um, what I don't have the correct years there, but those were the 2 teams he played for. I think it was 74 through 76 with the Toros. Well, in that league, he scored 30 goals twice and had 38 in 1974-75 for the Toros. In the WHA, he played 237 games with 89 goals, 143 assists for 232 points. Even to the bitter end, he was putting points up on the board. I think in his final season, the WHA, his numbers really took a bit of a spiral, if I may. I don't want to say he was a bad player, but his offensive numbers had dropped, and Frank retired after that. So I would definitely say Frank would belong on the list as well of guys that may have been, of the upper echelon of Leafs of all time. Um, as I said in a previous video, my dad, it was like Mahovlich might have been my dad's favorite player with the Leafs when he was a kid, scoring all those goals in Toronto, um, winning those 4 Stanley Cups. I don't know how you could deny he would be in the upper echelon of Leafs of all time. So there you have it. Now, also going to Detroit was Pete Stemkowski. Like Henderson, this guy was getting into his prime. He was only 24 years of age at the time. He had played previous 5 seasons with the Leafs. He had played 221 games with 29 goals, 64 assists, and 93 points to go with 245 penalty minutes. He was an all-star after winning the 1967 Stanley Cup with the Leafs. And then Pete would play an additional 746 games with 177 goals, 285 assists for 462 points. He scored 25 goals a couple of times in 1969-70 for the Wings and 1973-74 for the New York Rangers. He'd also played for the LA Kings. And definitely with Stemkowski, he was ready to play up in the lineup, I would say. He was ready to put more time on the ice, I believe, in the NHL. Now, the third player going to Detroit. This is the this is the tough one. Was Gary Unger. He had begun his NHL career just that year for the Leafs. He was only 20 years of age at the time. He'd only played 15 games with the Leafs with 1 goal, 1 assist for 2 goals, or 2 points, sorry. But he would go on to play another 1,090 games in the NHL, scoring 412 goals with 390 assists for 802 points. He went on to score 40 goals twice in his career. His career high was 42 in 1969-70 for the Wings. He was also known as Iron Man due to all the games he would have played consecutively. Nothing to do with Black Sabbath. He played in 7 All-Star games, 1972 through 76, while Ullman and Mahovlich were the Hall of Famers. It was definitely Gary Unger in this trade that is the deciding factor. Before I really crunch all the numbers and everything in here, and he went to have a great NHL career. He also played for the St. Louis Blues, which he may have played his best hockey for, the Atlanta Flames, the LA Kings, and finished his career with the Edmonton Oilers as Wayne Gretzky is starting his career in the NHL. Now, the final guy going to the Detroit Red Wings in this trade is the rights to Carl Brewer. Remember him? I guess I just keep talking about him. Um, he had not played an NHL game since the 1964-65 season. He wasn't done in the NHL though. He was 29 years old at the age of at the time of this trade. He had played 8 seasons with the Leafs, playing 453 games with 19 goals, 131 assists for 150 points. It was his aggressive defensive style that won him praise, as these offensive numbers weren't that amazing. It was like Bobby Vaughn, the same thing you would say about him. And it was all matched by his 896 penalty minutes during his time in Toronto. He had played in 3 All-Star games, so 1959, 62, and 64. And he was actually first in the league in penalty minutes in 2 seasons, 1959, 60, and 1964, 65. He had won 3 Stanley Cups in Toronto, 1962 through 64, and he would return to the NHL the following season and would play an additional 151 games with 6 goals, 67 assists for 73 points. He did come back to Toronto and suited up for the Leafs again back in 1979-80. He was 41 years old at that time, and then he retired after that. He played 1 season in the WHA for the Toros back in 1973-74, along with former Leaf Wayne Carlton. He did play 77 games with 2 goals, 23 assists for 25 points in the WHA as well. So there you have it. Um, yeah, the deciding factor in this trade is Gary Unger. Um, they uh, gave up too much, in my opinion, to get what they got. They still got some stuff, but they gave away Um, all four of the players they gave up still had some time left in them, or still were going to be important parts that you could put on this Leaf team. So I'm going to say I'm not going to make this trade. I'm going to keep all of those guys, keep them in my lineup next year. I'll look and see if I can put Carl Brewer back on defense with the Leafs, and see what happens from there. It's getting to be a bit of a clog up here with some of the players. I'm sure next year is Unger will be ready to get in there, and Brewer as well. But I just wouldn't make that trade. And definitely Carl Brewer, he's just icing on the cake to me. Um, the fact that maybe he should have been in Toronto this whole time playing. If cooler heads could prevail or find a middle ground, whatever the bickering was over, whatever the problem was, and it may have been just the treatment of himself and other players by Punch Imlach, in his style of coaching. So there you have it. That is the latest trade, the Frank Mahovlich, Norm Ullman trade. I would say they were the two Hall of Famers in that trade. So yeah, there you go. And my next video will be on yet another trade. There's a lot of trades going on this season with the Leafs. Um, but there you have it. So yeah, if you like this video, go ahead and like it. That'd be great. I'd appreciate it. If, and you can subscribe as well, or check out my channel. I'm planning on slapping down some more episodes about the Toronto Maple Leafs. And if you want to comment on anything, go ahead and do so. Um, that would be excellent. Now, as well, the Leafs currently they've played only 8 games. It's still early in the season. They have a 4-4 record now. The last 2 games they lost 6-2 to the Columbus Blue Jackets, and then last night they lost 5-1 to the St. Louis Blues. I wasn't able to see either game. I was working at the time, but they got Joseph Wall back in the lineup, and to be honest, I was kind of expecting that him not to be 100% or in the sharp category. I was expecting him to need some time to improve his game at the NHL level. Um, but they're playing Boston on Saturday night, and that's going to be a tough team to play against. And if they lose that, they'll be 4-5, and yeah, after what everybody was saying, oh, we're really clicking, we're doing great. Well, it's still early, but they need to turn the ship around a bit here to get back into the win column and steer things correctly, hopefully. But anyways, I'm Hawkeye, and thank you very much for tuning in today. And go Leafs, go!